Well, the Prime Minister was in Alice Springs today after months of reports of more violence there, especially from Aboriginal youths. But he was keener today to talk about the good things since his last visit a year ago.
But just 2 weeks into term 2, here's some of the figures that show. At Breitling Primary School down the road, 40 kids achieved 100% attendance in term 1. One class had 96% attendance for 6 weeks straight. That makes an enormous difference.
Well, that's nice, but Albanese did have to acknowledge and do something about the mayhem and promise another $14 million for more police just for Alice Springs, plus $8 million to improve schools. Joining me is Liberal Senator Kerrynne Liddle. Kerrynne Liddle, thank you so much for joining me. The Prime Minister's visit to Alice Springs, good that he went. $14 million extra for police, $8 million for schools. What did you make of it?
Well, it's about time he visited because he can hear the fury that I've been hearing from people living in communities where alcohol restrictions have been lifted, former CDC communities, but in obviously Central Australia, we've got a situation there where, just over 12 months ago, this government actually allowed the legislation to lapse that actually restricted the access to alcohol and then waited around for consultation before it actually took action, despite the fact locals were telling them they must act quicker. And now we're seeing so much money poured into Central Australia specifically, when it's actually poor policy decisions and poor responses and slow responses or no response to the issues that have actually required that kind of spending response.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of really graphic video come out of Alice Springs the last couple of years that's put it in the headlines, and I don't doubt that there's a real problem in Alice Springs, but it's not just Alice Springs. You were recently in Ceduna, South Australia, not far from where I once lived. There's trouble there too. You mentioned CDC's cashless debit card. The government scrapped them. These are cards that stop people on welfare from using the dole to pay for alcohol. What can you report from Ceduna?
Well, I think it's extraordinary that the Minister Rishworth comes out and says, well, there's no evidence that the card actually worked, and yet some 30 plus business owners and locals wrote letters saying this is ridiculous. Australians should not have to live like that. Locals were saying that. People from communities were saying that. There is plenty of evidence that the card actually did have an impact. But you know what's happening? There is so much more money being poured in. There was another 17 million that Minister Rishworth announced last week, pouring money into a problem that they actually helped create. We have to be asking what's being done with the money that's being spent in these areas.
Well, I don't quite get it. I mean, really, I think people have got to look more to ending welfare ghettos out bush where there's never going to be real work and helping more kids transition to jobs where there are jobs, like in big towns and cities. But that's just, I think we're a long way from that. Domestic violence. Look, Kerrynne, I know you've paid particular attention to this. You've been busy with this one. Another terrible day, 2 more deaths. One, the stabbing of a 10-year-old, allegedly by a 7-year-old sister. Another, a young woman, body found dead. Really, it's just dreadful. The Prime Minister is holding a National Cabinet meeting tomorrow to discuss what to do. He did today say one big problem was that Indigenous women were 7 times more likely to be killed in domestic violence. What needs doing?
Well, I think the first thing the Prime Minister should do to hold a mirror up to himself. We have had a commitment, an election commitment some 2 years ago for 500 much needed frontline community service workers, and almost 2 years to the date of that election commitment, there was 0 delivered. This is despite the Prime Minister coming out in November and saying, we're taking immediate and practical action. We've delivered on our commitment. He'd delivered 0, zip, nothing. So he needs to take a mirror to himself and ask, what are they doing in rolling out some of the things that are actually in the national plan to prevent violence against women and their children? What are they actually doing to put pressure on the states and territories to deliver on their part of the commitment? It's not enough just to make a big announcement and think, job's done, we've done our bit. It's actually about following through with taxpayers' money and asking those tough questions, not just of the states and territories, but of themselves. Have we deployed the money effectively? Have we deployed it in a timely manner? Because when you talk to the sector, what they're talking about right now, and I've been right around the country doing roundtables for quite some time, talking to the sector, and they say what's happening is the intensity of violence is definitely increasing. And part of that is because drug and alcohol addiction, pornography, they're saying it's also about repeat offenders, some of which is about 75% of reoffending. You don't have to have these huge funded conversations. You just need to talk to the sector and actually deploy the money that you promised you were going to give them quickly and effectively.